Just get centered. Take a couple deep breaths. In the Course there's a line that says, if you knew, and the word knew is very important because that means there's an absence of doubt. If you knew who walked beside you at all times on this path that you have chosen, you could never experience fear or doubt again. So just give a sense of gratitude for being able to do this and having it come out and having the memory to remember things and the vocabulary to make them come out and the education to make it happen and so on. That in my training with the I Am discourses, one of the things that Saint Germain says is that it's only one person in a million, which means there's only 300 people in America, if those statistics are correct, actually go on their knees every day and give thanks for their I Am presence and stay in a state of gratitude for the God that they are. And very often we give gratitude for the nice things that happen and for the nice people that show up and for all the bounty that is our lives and so on. But to give thanks for your excitement, for who you are. So that's how I'm starting this morning, I guess. It's God, we're back in Greece. I mean, it's just so wonderful to be back in Greece. I was here in 1982 and ran that Greek marathon, and a marathon to Athens. And I remember my time, in contrast to the guy who's running for vice president of the United States. I don't know if you heard that story or not, but he said that he ran a marathon, and they asked him what time. This is Paul Ryan. What was his time? Now, I've run 7 marathons. I know my times. Certainly within a minute or two. He said on the radio that his time was 2 hours and just 50-some minutes, just under 3 hours. And then they looked it up. Problem with today is that everything that you ever say or do is Runner's World magazine has every marathon that has ever been run and the time and who ran it. So they looked it up, and he was an hour and 20 minutes off of his time. He ran it in 4 hours and something. I don't know. I could go into a rant right now real easy. And I've got one side of me saying, and then another, this is being recorded, it's... I guess I just like the truth so much that beauty is truth. Truth is beauty. And that's all there is to know on earth, and all you need to know. Ode on a Grecian urn. Okay, I won't go there. I was different. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I wrote about in the last couple of months. I can see clearly now. I've looked back at the most significant events of my life, the ones that came to me in this 60-day period of writing every single day, 5, 6, 7 hours a day. Just being called to do it and couldn't take a day off under any conditions. Serena was there. There she is. And it was just like such a calling that I'm still just thrilled by it, that when something like this happens, because at the age of 72 you think, well, maybe like everybody else my age, they've just sort of retired, and even the concept doesn't even come into me. I don't even know what to do with that concept, and retire to what, I think about when Muktananda was passing, and all of his devotees were around his body, and he knew, and he had told them he was leaving, and they were begging him not to go. Please don't go, Swami. Please don't go, Master. And he said, don't be silly. Where would I go? Where is there to go? There's nowhere to go. I'm already here. And I think about that when I was doing the writing, but then there's the linear part of you that says, yeah, but you're 72, and it's the twilight of your life. And then you realize there is no twilight of your life. Your life is infinite, which I've been speaking about yesterday for a couple of hours. So to have that profound experience of just one day, just deciding that I was just going to start writing, and then 60 days later, 110,000 words have been written by hand. That's a lot of writing by hand. In fact, I even now when I pick up the pen, I can still feel and remember it, because there was just so much of it, and it was such an intense and wonderful experience. And I was wondering, why am I recalling these things that I'm recalling? Why aren't I recalling something else? What are the significant things that I'm recalling? So I didn't start with my conception, but I've thought about it based upon conversations I've had with my own mother about how I got into this world, and how desperately she did not want me to be into this world, and how she tried to make that not happen, and what a hardship, and so on, what that was. And I think about conversations I've had. I even had with Serena one time when she told me that, I said, if you don't like the way I'm parenting you, if you don't like the father I am, then you shouldn't have picked me. She said, you want to run that one by me one more time? I picked you, you're telling me I picked you to be my father? I said, yes. You picked Mom to be your mother. And if you don't like the way I'm doing this business of parenting, then you should be really looking at yourself and saying, why did I make a choice like this? She says, you're actually saying that people choose their own parents? I said, of course. We all, in the world of spirit, we make decisions about what we need to do in order to get here. She said, so I picked you? I said, yeah. She said, I must have been in a hurry. I said, well, when you're making decisions like that, you got to really be careful about it. So don't be blaming me. I'm just doing what I know how to do. And I think of, and I've told this story before, of a conversation I must have had myself with God when I came into this world, and that, and like, why would I even pick the father that I picked? Who would be such an abusive man and then leave, and never show up again? And many of you know the story of, and in fact there's a whole movie about it, called My Greatest Teacher, about how I ended up at my father's grave. I'm not going to tell that whole long story because it would take an hour to do it, and I have so many other things I want to speak about today. But it was in getting to my father's grave, 10 years after he passed away, when standing there on his grave, and I had gone to his grave to do something else on his grave. And I ended up being called back to his gravesite as I was driving away. And I had never seen this man, and he had been dead 10 years before I got to his grave in Biloxi, Mississippi. And I stood there on his grave and sat there and sobbed and had this long conversation, went away, was pulled back, and everything changed. It was one of the signal experiences of my life. And I said to my father, Melvin Lyle Dyer, 1914 to 1964, died at the age of 49, cirrhosis of the liver. From this moment on, I send you love. And I walked away from his grave and I said, I forgive you. And up till that time I had just been so angry all the time, and bad dreams, and waking up in a sweat, and just fighting, and having these, just going on these long searches for him. It's a long story. I've written a whole book about it, if you want to look it up, My Greatest Teacher, and you can see the film. But getting there was, it changed everything in my life. I walked away from his grave on the 30th of August, 1974, at the age of 34. I was overweight. I was drinking. I was eating poorly. My writing was, I was stuck. I was writing textbooks. I'd written 3 textbooks, all of which had been well received, but I really wanted to write for the public, and I just couldn't get it, and I couldn't. And I walked away from his gravesite, and I went back to New York, where I was a professor, and it was the 30th of August, and it was 2 weeks. We had 17 days before the semester started, the fall semester where I was teaching, and I got on a plane and I flew down to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, checked into the Spindrift Motel on A1A between Oakland Park and Sunrise, and I sat down and wrote Your Erroneous Zones in 14 days, beginning to end, cover to cover, without hardly. The only notes I had were the lectures I had been giving for the previous 3 years on tape that I had recorded, and I went through them all and I just wrote it, and I quit drinking and I started running. I started exercising, and I changed everything around. I was in a terrible marriage. I got out of it. Ended up meeting the woman who was to be the mother of 7 of my children. Everything changed. Everything shifted. Today, Your Erroneous Zones is in 47 languages. Somewhere between 70 and 100 million copies of it in print all over the world. The #1 book in the whole world for the entire decade of the 1970s, according to the New York Times. Everything changed. Forgiveness. And Mark Twain said, forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. Isn't that beautiful? Forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. That is, when you can send love where hatred seems to be, or where anger seems to be, or revenge has been called for. So if there's a lesson in that, for me, this was my greatest teacher. This was the person who really turned my entire life around. And who's to say that, when we talk infinity, remember I talked a lot about infinity yesterday. Infinity means no beginning, no end. As soon as you put a stop to it, it's no longer infinity, it becomes finite. The soul is infinite. You can't stop it any place. You can't put it into a box. You can't put a label on it. It just wants to expand. That's all it wants to do. So who's to say that my father didn't sign up before he got here in order to have 3 sons and have the youngest one experience what he experienced in order that you might have had some kind of a great awakening yourself. So many of you have, just from things that you've heard me say, or books that I've written, or so on. And And it's like, there's like an infinity to it all. And who am I to be judging any of this? The Course in Miracles says, in order to forgive, you must have blamed. And if you don't blame, then you don't have any forgiveness to do. It just all took place exactly the way it was supposed to take place. And if we can get that hatred and that bitterness and that vengeance and that revenge out of our hearts and just send love, because that's all you have to give away, because that's all you have to give away. If that's what's inside of you, that's all you have to give away. And, as I was telling that story to Ramdas at dinner one night in Maui, and he leaned over to me, and he speaks very softly and very, very slowly. And he said, I just don't think much about forgiveness. He said, I don't think that any of us have the right to be forgiving anyone else. And when you think about what the Course says about it, you're absolutely right. If you don't do any blaming, there's nothing to forgive. So anyway, I think about that, that whole experience, that an act of forgiveness, and I was drawn there by a series of spiritual events that took place in order for me to get there, that are just beyond anything that a linear mind can recognize and explain. How I got there. It's impossible, if we try to figure it out physically, how I might have showed up at my father's grave. And yet I did. And with God, all things are possible. Obviously, I had to make a U-turn in my life back in 1974. And do an about-face and get going in a different direction. Because my body was going to give out. I was overweight. I was eating just awful, greasy kinds of food, not exercising, and even a friend of mine, cardiologist, said, if you continue to conduct your life the way you're doing, eating greasy cheeseburgers and French fries, and I used to like them, the shiny buns that were better, the greasier they were. I know. See, this lady over here is wincing. But when they had the grease on them and it's all smooth on there, oh man, those were the best. And I'd usually top it off with a hot fudge sundae or something, and you can only do that so long. And I wouldn't have lived long enough to do any of the things that I had to do. I had to be turned around. It had to be turned around. Now I say this to you because when you get to a certain place, a certain time, certain age in your life, you begin to look back and you begin to see certain kinds of events and things, and many times they aren't what you wish they would have been, So I always think of a conversation that I had with God about picking my father, and my father having the conversation with God, deciding what he was going to do in this lifetime, and maybe the only thing that he came into this lifetime to do. Because don't forget, it's an infinity, so he's got trillions more lives to live if he wants to. It's like there's no end to it, and there's no beginning to it. And we know this is true. We know that infinity means no form, and it's always expanding, so it's like it's an infinity. It's not going to stop anywhere any more than the universe is going to stop. I mean, where do you think the universe stops? And what's at the end? Is there a wall there? Like what's on the other side of the wall? And how did it get there? And who built it? What's it made out of? And will it wear out? And it's like that concept of infinity is just so tough for us to grasp and get a hold of in our linear, it started here and it ends here mentality. So the only way you can get to a grip on it is to, I'll be reading some poetry from Rumi this week, probably even some today. And I mean, he talks about that journey that we take from reason, or from seed to reason. From seed to reason. You were a seed, and you've gone to reason. And he said that journey was not taken by going from step to step or from going from place to place. You don't get to the place where you were a seed and now you're reasoning by moving someplace, by doing something. That takes place internally. Isn't that a wonderful poetic concept? From seed to reason. It doesn't happen from place to place, from time to time. I'll read that poem to you when we're in Ephesus. In fact, I read it to my daughter and her girlfriend in London the other day. They were getting ready to go out. I said, wait, before you go, this is your lesson for the day. Both of them, we're in London, we have to listen to this shit. So I read it to them. I said, now, what does that mean? I don't know, we have to go. I said, no, what does it mean? Come on, let's talk about it. What is it? You were a seed and now you're a reasoning being. You didn't do it by going from step to step and place to place, from thing to thing. Anyway. So I think about having a conversation with God about what am I doing here? What my Father's only purpose may have been to get here, to get one person to understand forgiveness from a profound and deeply moving experience of that will alter his life, and in fact will possibly alter the entire consciousness of the planet and the universe. Possibly could do that, you know. Certainly, you can affect millions and millions and millions of people all over the globe. Just by coming in here and being an asshole for for 49 years, you know. Because my mother always had this conversation with me because she was always very upset whenever I would try to find my father. I'd go on these long trips to try to find him because he married like 7 different women and just was, you know, and each one of them that I met and talked to all confirmed the same thing that my mother said. He definitely was an asshole. In the sense that we put definitions on it, I think he was a divine spiritual being who came into this world to teach me something about forgiveness and perhaps help you to do the same thing, because if there's anybody, there's a guy sitting here right in the front row. What's your first name? What is it? Mike, can you come on up here? I wasn't going to do this, but I guess I am. So my father making the decision that he made and my showing up at his grave, this gentleman that you're about to see, with the funny colored arms, Michael, hey Michael, thanks man. Just in 5 minutes, 3 minutes, just tell them what you told me.
You gotta forgive me, my voice is a little on the sore side.
I'm not going to forgive you for that.
Beautiful. Anyway, after watching my greatest teacher, Dr. Dyer's story was such an influence to me that I got to see, I haven't seen my father in 32 years, and after hearing his story and the fact that your father had passed by the time you actually got to see him, encouraged me to Google him. And I had no idea how to contact him. So for 95 cents, I Googled his name, and it gave me his address, his email address, his phone number. So I sent him an email, and he responded. And within a week, I had recently quit my job because I just wanted to try something new in my life. All right. Yeah. That a little better?
Yeah.
All right, good deal. All right. And I wanted to try something new in my life. And I had quit my job. We had been embracing the teachings of the things that you've been saying. And anyway, he responded. And within 5 days, I drove up. It was about 1,000 miles away. And we live in Sedona, Arizona, and he lives in the middle of Kansas somewhere. And we drove there. I had more in common with him in 3 days than I had with my stepdad in 30 years. And just the synchronicities that have followed that have just been an amazing experience to me. We had already had this trip planned, and his sister lives in Rome, so she was able to come get us from the airport, supply us a place to live, take us to the boat, and we had already had everything already planned. So
this is your aunt?
My aunt, yeah, his sister. So it was like, what are the odds that, you know, she was living in Rome of all places, and everything is meant to be.
So you saw the film and you decided to do it after seeing the film?
Yes, sir. Definitely.
And how do you feel about your father?
He's an amazing person. He's an amazing person. Everything that was odd about me with my known family came into place when I met him. Because everything that was different in me from my family was similar in him. So it was, I'm really glad that I reached out.
And how does he feel about you?
Pretty much the same, you know. We just connected, and he's coming to visit as soon as I get back from this trip. And we're probably never going to stop talking to each other now. So I was very fortunate.
Thanks, Michael.
Hey. Thanks so much.
Thank you. God bless you. Yeah, thanks. So, you know, in an infinite world, my father probably knew that. Who knows? I think about this because my mother, who just passed 2 months ago, I always say to her, it's like, when you get there, you think Lyle, it's my father's name, you think he's going to be there with you? She said, well, if he is, I've got a surprise for him. And this was just a few days before she died, you know. My mother never swore, ever. I mean, it was really, really rare for her even to say hell. You know, she was such a very proper lady. But when I would talk to her about forgiveness and all of that, she would always say, you know, he left you, but I lived with that bastard. I know what he was like. And anyway, so I think about myself as having a conversation with my father, or with God, rather, before I'm to come into this world. And in this conversation with God, I say, I would like to come here into this physical domain. And God says, well, what would you like to do? And I say, well, I would like to teach self-reliance. But I mean, he said, but for a whole lifetime? You want to spend an entire lifetime teaching self-reliance? And I said, yeah, that's really what I want to do. So God says, well, then we better get your little ass into an orphanage. Because when you're there, you'll have to rely upon yourself. And you'll learn that, and you'll get that. And once you know it, and once you've experienced it as a child, no one will ever be able to take that away from you. So I look upon my 10 years in foster homes and in orphanages and so on as what it was necessary for me to experience, to go through in my life in order to be able to be here on this stage today. And to write the books that I've written and so on. And I urge you to do the same thing with especially the things that you have labeled hardships, or the things that you think shouldn't have happened to you. That Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a dear friend, who lost so much in her life when she had a fire. She lived in Arizona and all of her things burned down. She called me and she had some autographed books of mine and she asked if I would replace them. And I loved this woman. She was a beautiful soul. She was a triplet from Switzerland. And she wrote so much on death and dying and so on, and the whole grieving process. And I used to talk to her about that it's because one of the flaws of self-actualizing people, according to Maslow, is that they get over death almost as if it didn't happen. And I thought that would happen with my mother, but it isn't that I walk around with some deep sadness. I see you, because your mom, who was with us just a short time ago, has left as well. But it's not a sadness, it's just an exquisite kind of mysterious feeling, you know, that I can't put my finger on, but it's, you know, very, very quickly. But Elizabeth Kubler-Ross said, if you shield the mountain from the windstorms, you'll never see the beauty of the carvings. So the storms of our life, if we try to shield ourselves from the storms of our lives, we don't get to see the beauty of the carvings, of what those storms bring for us. And virtually every spiritual advance, not virtually, every spiritual advance that you make in your life, that I've made in my life, has been preceded by a fall of some kind or another. I always give the example of when I was in high school, I was on the track team, and I was the high jumper on the track team, among other things. And the bar would be set up here. Now, I don't really jump very high because I'm white. White men don't jump. You probably saw the film. And we used to jump against when the kids, the black kids from the other schools would come to ours. You know, they'd set the bar up here, and I'd look at that like I couldn't pole vault over that. You know, but anyway, I was able to jump a certain height. I don't want to give a Paul Ryan thing. I think I jumped 7'6", maybe 7'7", or maybe it was 5'1". It was in there somewhere. Stop me from going on this rant, okay? So anyway, the bar would be up here, and we get back here, and you run up to this is a metaphor for what I'm speaking about, and you run up to the bar, and you run up and get down as low as you can, as fast as you can, and in the process of getting down low, it would allow you to propel yourself over the bar. So the low points of our life are the times when we should be in a state of gratitude, as hard as that is for us to do. But that's what an enlightened being does, is they begin to see that, you know, these low points in our life. Now, I've been through some low points in my life, very dramatic low points. When my wife and I separated 12 years ago, I mean, it was the closest thing that I could call it to a depression. For months and months. And out of that depression and out of that deep hurt and sadness about breaking up our family, in a sense, because we're not really broken up, but I was able to write The Power of Intention, which is the next book after Erroneous Zones that just soared and just took off and sells in the millions all around the planet. And it came from a place of compassion. That it's when you are in those low points that you have a tendency to reach out to other people with more compassion and more love and more understanding because of what you're going through yourself. So that, you know, I think, and this is true, I could give 1,000 examples of that, but the whole idea of it is that these low points, the struggles that we go through in our lives are really significant things, and look back at them, and you can do an awful lot of growing from them. So 10 years or so in an orphanage, and I look back at the times, and one of the events that I remember that I wrote about was the only reason I was in a foster home at that time was because there was a depression in the world, and my mother, she just, you know, there was no aid to dependent children, there was no government money for that, there was a war. This was 1942, 1941, 42. I mean, and so it was really just basically churches and so on that just created organizations to help parents who have children, and you can't feed them because there was no food. There was coupons, you know, and there weren't things like food stamps and so on. Things were rationed. You know, there was just that's what it was like at that time. And we're little babies, and they have to be fed, and so the churches would set up these organizations, and I was just one of those, along with my brother. And I was placed into this home, and I was out in Mount Clemens, Michigan. And it was a home filled with people like this, like me. I mean, children who, it wasn't that their parents didn't want them or didn't love them, they just couldn't afford them, and they couldn't feed them. And so they got help wherever they could. And one of my earliest memories is of being in this place, and new kids would come in all the time, and they would always call for me. And this was before I started school. So I must have been 4, 5, something like that. And there was a little girl named Martha who who had come in, and she was crying and sobbing because she was going to be left there, dropped off at this place. And they said, and Mrs. Scarf, the lady who ran the place, said, ran the place, it was her home. She said, go find Wayne. And they went and got me, and I started talking to Martha. I can remember my little conversation with this little girl saying, this is a great place. You're going to love it here. First of all, there's no parents. There's nobody to tell you what to do. You can do anything you want. And we've got apple trees in the back. We've got cherry trees back there. We got a chicken coop. We actually can see little baby chickens being born. And you know, I still look back on those years of being in this place as, you know, when you're living in an orphanage, you don't wake up every day and say, oh my God, I'm an orphan again today. How did this happen to me? This isn't fair. Other people aren't. They get to have things. They're driving around in a Mercedes and I have a wagon. It's not right. You don't do that. You don't do that till you're 40. And then you look back and you say, why are things not working for you? And how come your life is so messed up? Well, what do you expect from me? I was an orphan and all that. But when you were an orphan, you just got up and you just lived today. You didn't go around putting labels on yourself and being, you know, and and you learn to rely on yourself. You know, there's so many wonderful things can happen, you know, in that out of that experience. So I would look back on that, and I realized as I was writing, I can see clearly now. I would just meditate every morning before I would write, as I did this morning for almost 2 hours. I was doing the I Am meditation. And as I was meditating, and when I would do this kind of a meditation, I would just, before I would write, I would look at what are the significant things? What do you remember, you know, about, because I honestly, as I look back at my life now and so many of the things that happened, like how I ended up at my father's grave, the whole movement towards St. Francis in my life when I wasn't Catholic and had nothing to do, and yet I've been to Assisi, you know, on 3 occasions and wrote a book there and just get called there. My calling by Lao Tzu to come and to live the Tao for the full year of my 66th year. You know, it's like, how did I get called, and what were the circumstances? And I've been relaying all of this, but I was trying to go way back, because I honestly look back now and feel like I've been in some kind of training program. And I said to you yesterday, I mean, I call it like ascended master training. And it's like, as I look back on my life, I was different than the other kids. It was, I was the only kid in my elementary school that when we had dance class, you know, we had to go during gym, and then we had to go to dance, and we had to dance. We had to do square dance, and we had to do the box. You know, remember the box? Dun, 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 dun. Do you remember that? Did you have to do that? And the girls would line up on one side of the gym, and the boys on the other. I'm talking very young, and I was always the kid, and I was very popular in school. As people just looked up to me, as I was just the leader in the classroom. This is not something where I'm assuaging my ego. I'm just telling you the truth. But I was the only kid who had ever danced with the fat girls. I couldn't stand to see the fat girls. Not get, I tell you their names, but this is recorded, and so I don't want to say her name, and her name, and her name, and so, but I would always go pick them, and then everybody'd say, oh, Wayne's dancing with so-and-so, and it's like, when I moved in with my mom, I was in a little school. It's called Marquette Elementary School. Marquette days, dear Marquette days, friendship born to live always. I don't know where that came from. Why does that stuff stick in there? Anyway, that was our little school song. I don't think I've sang that since the 3rd grade or 4th grade or whatever it was. But they said one day that this new girl had come to school, and I can say her name. Her name was Rhoda Rose. And all of the kids were going around talking about Rhoda, and don't talk to Rhoda, you know, and you don't want to hang out with Rhoda. Rhoda's someone that you just don't want to be with. And I kept saying, what's wrong with Rhoda? You know, what? Well, we just heard, but she's a Jew. And I said, what is that? I had no idea what a Jew was. Never heard the word before. I said, well, all we know is that it's just not good, you know, and you don't hang out with a Jew because she's a Jew. And that would, truly, this is what was going on. It was in Detroit, on the east side of Detroit. So I found out where Rhoda lived and went right over to Rhoda's house. I wanted to know, what is a Jew? And they, yeah, the parents looked like everybody else's parents that I knew, and the house looked the same, and Rhoda was just, she was just a nice girl, that's all. So I would dance with Rhoda. And Rhoda only lived a couple of blocks away from where I lived, so I would go to school with her, and I'd walk in with her. And then another kid was, a new kid came from the school, from a Catholic school. His name was Guy Cordy, K-O-R-T-E. And no one would talk, nobody liked Guy because he was very loud, and he was, and nobody wanted him to be in the group, you know, with whatever the group was there in the 4th grade or 5th grade. Something in me, as I look back on it, just said, if nobody's going to allow this guy to get in, then he's going to be my friend. And if he was my friend, then it would have to be everybody else's friend, because everybody wanted to be my friend for some reason. So it was, this was the way my life was as a young kid. And when I say to you, I was different. But I think I was different because I was in training for something. I mean, there were things that would happen that would bother me that didn't bother anybody else. And I mean, I was dancing with the girl that I was gaga over. Her name was Erlene Rentz at my 30th high school reunion about 20 years ago. And then we're dancing, and I was telling her what a crush I had on her and how pretty she was, and she was this and that. And she said, Wayne, she said, the only thing I remember about you is that you were the most generous person I ever knew. And she said, I still remember it to this day. She said, you used to give your lunch away to any kid who forgot their lunch. And if you had a little bit of extra lunch money, you always gave it away. And when you get to talk to my daughter, Serena, she'll tell you, and anyone in here who knows me, Elizabeth, and Reed, and Maya, and Nancy, that's just like whether it's a flaw or whatever it is, but that's just, I have always been somebody who gives it away, who is not attached to it, and wants somebody else to have it. This, I think, is a part of the training that I have been involved in my life, of not trying to tell you that I'm better than anybody else. It was, as I look back and see clearly now, it was how I was being groomed for the work that I do and what I'm doing here today and what I will continue to be doing as a young person. In the 4th grade at Arthur Elementary School, before I went to a lot of schools, to a different school every year. A lot of moving around. And in Arthur Elementary School, we had a teacher, her name was Mrs. Ingalls. And the school ended at 3:15 every day. And Mrs. Ingalls would read to us from 2:45 until 3:15 every day. But the only reason that she would read to us is if the class behaved itself during the day. So if people got noisy or gave her a hard time or rambunctious or whatever you do when you're in the fourth grade to make the teacher mad, she would just say, I won't read today. And she only read one book for the whole fourth grade. And the book was called The Secret Garden. And I loved this book so much. And what was being said in this book, that I became the enforcer in the classroom. It's true. I wouldn't let people talk. I'd make them raise their hand if they wanted to go to the bathroom. I wouldn't let them get out of line when we were going from one class to the other. I wouldn't let them go to the drinking fountain unless they got permission from Mrs. Engel. I mean, I was like her cop, her little policeman in the room. And if anybody started to talk out of hand, I'd look at them and say, and they all thought that I was just like the teacher's pet and that I was just trying to kiss the teacher's butt and all of this kind of stuff and all this what they called brown-nosing at the time. I wasn't doing anything like that. I didn't care whether the teacher liked me or not. It was irrelevant to me. All I wanted to do was make sure I got to hear The Secret Garden. How many have read The Secret Garden? Yeah, or seen the movie? Yeah. I recommend it to you. Because it's the story of a little girl named Mary who is an orphan. And this was, fourth grade was the first year I lived with my mother. She lived in England, and there was this door. This is what I remember. I haven't looked at this book. I looked it up as I was writing. I can see clearly now. I looked it up. And I read a little bit about it, and it really brought back some incredible memories. But it was like there was this doorway to this place, and when you went into this doorway, like, everything was possible. All things were possible. I mean, magical things happened, and it's sort of like a Harry Potter kind of thing. Just this very exciting, exquisite miracles would happen. People. She had a little friend. I can't remember his name. Anybody remember the little boy's name? Dumbroth or something. It was an English name. But anyway, and she just took this little crappy little kid who had a bad attitude and was nasty all the time, and she was like, she turned him into, she was like Pollyanna, Everybody always complained about Pollyanna, Oh, you're so Pollyanna-ish. I say, Pollyanna? I mean, everybody in the town was miserable. The whole time, everybody was broke, nothing was working, everybody was mad at everybody. This little girl comes to town, and after she's there for a few months, the whole town is happy and joyful and everything. I said, Pollyanna, hell, I'll take Pollyanna any day. I love the idea of being Pollyanna, making everybody happy, having that kind of energy and so on. This is what excited me, and this is what I knew how to do as a child. And for some reason, I would be, out of 30 kids in the classroom, I would be the one that would make sure that everybody was included, that would be conscious of would have kindness in my heart for some reason. And it's like, and I speak to that. So then I moved in with, I had a stepfather. And my stepfather's name was Bill Drury. And he was an alcoholic, bad alcoholic. He was my father in another body. Abusive, nasty. I always told my mother, that life gives exams. It's like algebra, If you don't pass it, you gotta take it over. So you didn't pass it, you had to take it over. And so she did it again, and we that's what she did. Anyway, he was a bad dude. A nice man when he didn't drink, but he always drank. Literally would have a case of beer delivered to our house every day from the Caju pantry shelf. And I would drive around the block and wait for him, for his car to be gone. He'd go to the bar, and he'd come home. He drank and drove all the time, drove home drunk all the time. Had a 1952 Chevy. I can remember exactly what it looked like. And so I would just wait and wait, because I didn't want to go in the house, because if I went in the house, I'd have to take his grief, and his grief could sometimes be pretty bad, be physical and so on. So I lived with an alcoholic for about 5 years. And my decision in living with an alcoholic was to not drink. So I took a vow to drink till I was in my 20s, till I was 21, and I didn't at all as a teenager. I was the designated driver all through high school. Myself, I was just appointed one. And then, but the thing about my stepfather, he was Catholic, and he had gone to the University of Detroit, very big on Catholicism and so on. And he had there was a show on television, and I'm going to see who's old in this room. We had an Admiral TV, black and white, with a screen about this big. And there was a show. There was a very famous comedian. His name was Uncle Milty, Milton Berle, and it was like the biggest show on television. Every Tuesday night, he was Mr. Tuesday Night. How many remember Mr. Tuesday Night? Come on, all you old folks, get your hands up there, okay? So now, I don't know if any of you remember, there was a show that played opposite Milton Berle show. Because Milton Berle show was like the #1 rated show in the entire country every year. But there was a show that played opposite. And I never watched the Milton Berle show. I watched the show that played opposite it. Anybody know? Fulton, Bishop, Sheen. Fulton, Bishop, Sheen. Or Bishop Fulton Sheen, rather. Bishop Fulton Sheen. And the show was called, anybody? That's right, who said that? All the way in the back, all right. Life is Worth Living. That was the name of the show. I went crazy for Life is Worth Living. All of my friends, they would all watch Uncle Milty, all of the crazy things that they would do on the Milton Berle show. And I remember, because Bishop was a Catholic bishop, and my stepfather was Catholic, and he would turn this thing on once in a while. Then I just got hooked on it. And I really wanted to watch it, because every week it was a show about life being worth living. And this was 1952. I was 12 years old. And this is what I would watch. I would make sure that I was home every night. And believe it or not, I would take notes on this show about life is worth living. And that show received an Emmy, the very first Emmy. And Milton Berle show didn't get it. And anybody remember Milton Berle's comments when he was told that Bishop Sheen got an Emmy for his show and he didn't? He said he had better writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That was Milton Berle's response. So I would watch these shows, and I'm just giving a few of these examples. I can see clearly now, it takes me right up to, there's about 60 of these kinds of events. But one that I distinctly remember is the Tonight Show started at that time as well. 1953, 12 years old, 13 years old. And the host of the Tonight Show was Steve Allen. And the Tonight Show went till 1 o'clock in the morning, from 11:30 to 1, every night, with that cast of characters, Louis Nye, do you remember, and Don Knotts. Some of you look at me like, who is he? What is he talking about? Now, I used to watch that show night after night after night after night. And I'd get up the next night, stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning. And then I'd always have trouble getting up the next morning, because I had a paper route that I had to deliver the Detroit Free Press in the morning, and we had to go at 6 o'clock. So I had to deliver papers from 6 to 7, and then get to school by 8 o'clock. That was my routine as a young kid. We all had paper routes. I had 2 paper routes I had the Detroit News in the afternoon and the the Detroit Free Press in the morning. So, so I would watch the show, and my mother would have to get me out of bed, and it was such a struggle. I'd go out and I would watch, and I would tell her that when I do the Tonight Show, and this is how I talked, because my mother will tell I was going to say my mother will tell you this. You can call her, but you'll have to get her from a different channel. And I would say to her, when I do the Tonight Show myself, I wouldn't say it that way, and I would talk differently about this. And I used to always talk about doing the Tonight Show, that when I do it, and I would literally, this is when I talk about this training that I'm in, and I just wonder if any of you react to this or whatever, is that I have this sort of, this knowing within me, even as a young boy, that if I put my mind on something, I could just make it happen in my mind. And if I knew if I could make it happen in my mind, I could make it happen in reality. And I was doing that kind of stuff all the time. I can remember being in classroom and my 8th grade teacher, Mrs. Florence Feuer, saying, and I'd be just looking out the window, and I'd just be in one of those places where I could just let my imagination just run wild. And she'd say, "Wayne, would you care to rejoin the class, please?" And I would say, "No." "Do I have to?" "Because I already know what you're talking about. We don't need to do long division 14 times in a row to get it. I got it. I can do that." And all of that stuff was just so simple. Mathematics and spelling words. I won the spelling bee every year in my class. So all of that stuff was just so simple. It's like if you know how to divide a fraction, you don't have to do it 50 times to prove that you know it, and that's what they would have us doing. So I would just leave. So I would say that this kind of thing about, and my mother would say, "Oh, you're such a dreamer. You just always think that you can do anything." And it's like, you're not going to be on the Tonight Show. You don't do the Tonight Show. You're a little boy, and blah, blah, blah. And so fast forward like 25 years to, 1976 from 1952. That's what, 24 years, 25 years. And I get called to do the Tonight Show. And I'm going to be on with Johnny Carson. Actually, the first time I was on with Shecky Green. I did the show 37 times. And so I got called out there, and I was all excited. I could do 2 hours on that, and I got to stop this because I've got to get to the rest of what I want to talk about. But the Shecky Green, I get there to the show. I have my own dressing room. I mean, it's just so exciting. I'm going to be on the Tonight Show, and Orson Welles is a guest on the show, and Robert Blake, guy who got accused of killing his wife, and the first guest on the Tonight Show, on my very first appearance on the Tonight Show, is Steve Allen. And I walked by and said hello to him. And I just froze for a moment. I froze in time because I had already seen myself doing the Tonight Show when I was 12 years old with Steve Allen. And there I was with Steve Allen. And there are so many stories like that in my life. And there are stories like that in your life as well. Very often the stories that like this that Carl Jung called synchronicities, very often these stories are, we just attribute them to just, they're just little circumstances, they're just little coincidences and so on. But I suggest to you that all of us are in Ascended Master training. All of us are. Because who we are is infinite. Here's one of my all-time favorite quotes. It's from the 6th President of the United States. Who would that be? That's right. John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams wrote this 2 days before his death. John Quincy Adams is well. But the house in which he lives at the present time is becoming dilapidated. It's tottering on its foundations. Time and the seasons have nearly destroyed it. Its roof is pretty well worn out. Its walls are much shattered and tremble with every wind. I think John Quincy Adams will have to move out of it soon. But he himself is quite well, quite well. Isn't that great? 2 days before his death. So that these visions, these thoughts, and there's not one cell left of that little 12-year-old boy who was watching that black and white Admiral television, or who was telling Martha that this was a great place, or any of those stories who befriended Rhoda Rose so that Rhoda Rose would be a part of our entire classroom and accepted. There's not a cell left in me of that on this planet. And yet, that image, that thing that John Quincy Adams is speaking about. So, I talked yesterday about ordinary levels of consciousness, extraordinary levels of consciousness. In order to get to this place, what we have to do is understand that our total awareness of who we are is called our concept of ourself. And our concept of ourself is everything that we believe to be true. And if you're here, and most of us are, not always here, but most of us live our lives here at this ordinary level of consciousness, that everything that you believe true got you to this place. And if you want to get to this place, this extraordinary level of consciousness, you have to do something that Saint Germain says only a handful of people are capable of doing. You must be willing to change your concept of yourself. You must be willing to change what you believe to be true. That is, what is possible or not possible for you. We have a tendency to just attribute things to, like, science. We'll say, well, science tells us, and if it's not scientific, if there's not evidence for it. The problem with science is that science is what studies the brain. What is the brain capable of? What is your brain capable of? The only problem is that they use a brain, their brain, to decide what a brain is capable of. So that the brain itself is not wired to be objective about what a brain can do or what it can't do, right? So that it's sort of like people saying, I could get up here and say, well, everything that I'm telling you is true. And you say, well, how do you know? Well, it's in the book. Oh, it's in the book? Well, who wrote the book? Oh, I wrote the book. It's in there. This is, and so you have to take and understand that everything that we have scientific evidence for has been studied by a brain that is studying a brain. And what we have to do is get to a place of awareness in which we're beyond the brain. And the brain can't do this. The brain can't be objective enough to figure out things because the brain is linear. The brain believes in cause and effect and beginnings and ends and what you can see and what you can touch and but everything, it's like I had who is a he's a surgeon. I was going to say a neurotic surgeon, which he is, but neurosurgeon. And he was saying to me one time, he lives on Maui, and we were having lunch together, and he said, I've been inside a lot of brains, and I've never seen this thing that you are calling spirit. I've never seen anything like that inside of a brain. I can tell you about the medulla, I can tell you about this, I'm an expert on the brain. And I said to him, Mike, when you're in there poking around in a brain, have you ever seen a thought? And he said, no, I've never seen that. I said, but are there such things? A brain can't comprehend something that doesn't have a beginning or an end or something linear. So now what we have to do is get to a different place within ourselves. And this business of moving to a higher level of consciousness is, it's so exquisite and it's so exciting, but it's like, it means that, I'll give you an example of it. It's another one of those things that I wrote about in I Can See Clearly Now. It was 1978. Now, I'd written two books now, Your Erroneous Sounds and Pulling Your Own Strings, both of which had topped the bestseller lists and were, so I was like this famous young guy who had a big ego, thought it was me, impressed by myself, and people were just, giving me all of the attention that you get when you're on bestseller lists and doing the Tonight Show and all of the kinds of things that were taking place in my 30s. This little orphan kid from Mount Clemens. So I get invited to Vienna in Austria to appear on something called a YPO, Young Presidents Organization, conference. So I go to this conference, and they don't pay you for that, but it's like, it's just for speaking there, but it's just this incredible experience because they have something like 1,000 presidents of companies, all who are under the age of 50, with more than, I think, 50 employees, or maybe it's 500 employees, I don't know, but these are presidents of fairly large companies and very influential people, and they have this week-long university. And psychology is one of the areas, and they have it on economics. And in fact, the Vice President of the United States was there on the same program that I was on, Walter Mondale, who was Vice President of the United States at that time. So it's like, it was a very, very prestigious thing to be invited to, and I was only invited to it, and it's considered a great honor to be invited and speak there. The only reason I was invited there was because I had these two massive, huge best-selling books. So I get there and I'm on a panel, and they put me on a panel with two other people. And we're going to talk to these people. Now, the first person, a woman that was on the panel, her name is Virginia Satir. Virginia Satir, family therapist, brilliant woman. I just loved her. She was, I just didn't feel like I belonged in the same room with her. She was so bright and so on. And then the other person I was on the panel with was somebody that I studied when I was working on my PhD, and who I adored and respected so much that I had actually had been teaching. This was 1978, so I'd already left the university, and I had been teaching doctoral students myself for 6 or 7 years. And I require his book to be read by virtually all of my classes, and I'd studied it in my own doctoral studies. He had written something called logotherapy, which is the study of meaning in our lives. And so his name was Viktor Frankl. So Victor and I are sitting next to each other on this panel. And I'm just in awe, blown away, and feeling like I'm way out of my element here. What am I doing here with this man? If you don't know who Viktor Frankl was, look it up. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. In 1939, he was he was a psychiatrist and living in Berlin, and he was very prominent, and he was Jewish, and he was taken from his home and put into Auschwitz in Poland, and then moved to Dachau, where I went to visit because of the influence that he had had on my life. When I went there in 1974, I walked the streets of Dachau, poked around in those ovens, and just found myself like I had... It was as if I had been there myself. I mean, this was taking place in my own lifetime. I couldn't imagine that these kinds of atrocities were taking place. And anyway, that's the long story. I could go way off on that as well. And I write about all of that, my experience with Anne Frank in Amsterdam and being in her home and feeling the energy and actually just having to actually walk out of her room in the attic where she was hiding because the energy was so hard that I absolutely could not breathe. I just thought that my lungs were going to collapse. It was so, and the same thing was true at Auschwitz, and the same thing was true in Dachau, especially in Dachau. And I wrote about that as well, what those experiences have meant to me. And it takes me back to the Road of Rose back in the early 1950s, which was only 7 years after the end of World War II. So I don't know, there must have been something in it. So there I am anyway. I'm talking to this audience, and Viktor Frankl is addressing the audience. And then after I addressed the audience, he addressed Virginia Satir. We had a conversation. People asked us questions. And then Victor and I had lunch afterwards at my request, and spoke with a very heavy accent. And he survived 5 years in a concentration camp. Lost everyone else in his family except one sister who had gone to Australia. Lost his whole family, parents, wife, all of it. And he said something to me that I've never forgotten. He said, when we are faced with situations in our life over which we have no control, we are ultimately challenged to change ourselves. And if we cannot change ourselves, and what we have come to believe is true, we will not survive. And in Man's Search for Meaning, which is required reading, if you're watching this on video, if you're listening today, you really should read Man's Search for Meaning. It really talks about how people were able to survive by just having meaning in their lives. And it touched me. He touched me so profoundly. He was witty and brilliant and fun and nice, but above all of that, he was immensely kind, immensely kind. And he said, the people who just couldn't find meaning, he said, we were given given a bowl of dirty soup, dirty water, just dirty water, and a floating fish head in a bowl of dirty water. And he said, that was our meal for the day. And I was challenged to find beauty in it's just so touching. It's just because that picture is so clear. To be able to find beauty in that experience, and he wrote it down. And when Immaculée Ilibagiza came on my PBS show, who wrote the book Left to Tell, who was a part of the Rwandan Holocaust, where they killed 1 million people in 1994, and she survived, and that's another book. And she asked me, I wrote the foreword to it, and I found her and asked Hay House to publish her book, and it's just one of the most beautiful books you'll ever read in your life. And she asked me for a title, and the title I gave her for her book came from Viktor Frankl, because he had said, I was left to tell. I was left to tell. I survived because I had to know. He had to smuggle out his notes on what he was experiencing in the death camps. He had to smuggle them out on tissue paper and things in order for it to survive. So our need to have meaning in our lives comes from the necessity that we have within us to reach an exalted level of consciousness. We have to be able to change our concept of ourself. And changing your concept of yourself will be the biggest challenge you've ever had in your life, because you have to change things that you have been told are true, and they're not. We have all been led to believe a lie. when we see with, not through the eye. We've been led to believe a lie. We've been led to believe that who we are is incapable of fulfilling a destiny, a dharma, and doing things that we thought were absolutely impossible. I have a quote here, I think. In order to reach the truth, this is from a French philosopher named René Descartes, who you had quite a bit to say about, didn't you? In your book. Aren't you the lady who gave me the book? Who's the lady? Oh, there you are. Oh my God, you look like sisters. René Descartes. I read your book last night, much of it. Brilliant. Beautifully done. Very well written. What's it called? The Light? Who Needs Light? You might want to get to know this lady. What is your name? Catherine May. Just brilliant. I know. It was a channeled book. Did you write the poetry? Beautiful. In order to reach the truth, it is necessary at some point in one's life to rid oneself of all of the opinions one has received and to rebuild one's entire system of knowledge from the very foundations. René Descartes. So, I'm asking you to think about doing that. And I'm going to quickly go through, because I've got something else I want to do here this morning. This, the biggest lie that you've been given, that you have been raised on, weaned on, that you've raised your children on, that your parents were raised on. And so in Wishes Fulfilled, there are 3 chapters at the beginning, the first 3 chapters. The first chapter is about changing your concept of yourself, basically what I'm speaking about here. Second chapter, I call it the higher self. All of this was, you talk about, Catherine, your book being channeled, this was all just channeled. This was just like I can see clearly now was channeled, all of these experiences. I've only given 3 or 4 here today, and there are 60 as I go through my years in the Navy, my years in high school, my years in college, my years in graduate school, my years as a professor, my years getting my books published. I could go for 2 hours and tell you how the very first book how Your Erroneous Zones got published. In 2 minutes, I can tell you that I was given an appointment I took the manuscript that I had written in 1974, that I told you about earlier, and took it to my agent, Artie Pine, had arranged for me to have a meeting with a man named Paul Farges at T.Y. Kroll Company in New York City. And I went there, and Paul was so depressed and so upset, and he was just broken down. And I was a therapist. I had a practice there, and I said, I was there to have him see if he would be willing to publish my book. So it was supposed to be about me. And this man was, you could just see, and I forgot about the manuscript, and I spent 3 hours counseling him and talking to him and telling him, because the night before his wife had said she wanted a divorce. And they had 2 children, and he was just so broken up, he just didn't know if he could even make it. And we talked for a long time. He became one of my best friends, and I talked to him and helped him through that whole process. And my agent called me after the meeting. He said, "So, how did it go? How was your meeting? Are we going to get this book published? You think they'll publish it?" And I said, "Forgot to talk about the book." Never mentioned it. He was so angry at me. It was the only time he was really angry at me. He said, "Do you know what it took for me to get this appointment for you? You're a nobody. Nobody even knows who you are. And you're not talking about the book. You've just blown the biggest opportunity you ever had." And that same evening, Paul called Artie and told him, "I don't care what his book's about, I want to publish his book." It's a true story, true story. So it's like, when you forget about yourself, I mean, what's the lesson in that? When you let go of what's in it for me, and the mantra of the ego is, what's in it for me? How much more can I get? What about me? How about me? I want some more. The mantra of the higher self is, how may I serve? What may I do for you? And when you do that, everything shows up for you. That's when you follow your excitement. And when your excitement, what did I say yesterday? When you follow your excitement, you will be supported and it will be effortless. Because you are now aligned with God. That's what God is, your excitement. What excites you? And what excited me in that moment, back in 1975, when I had that meeting with Paul, what excited me was what excited me every day when I had my practice and my patients would come in and I would talk to them, is helping somebody to get over what seems like a trauma that is just irresolvable. So, back. So the higher self, this is one of my favorite quotes. It's from Peter Dunoff. He says, the higher self. Our higher self is perfect, omniscient, and almighty, a fragment of God himself, a pure, transparent, luminous quintessence. The Creator has planted within every creature a fragment of himself, a spark, a spirit of the same nature of himself. And thanks to his spirit, every creature can become a creator. And this means that instead of always waiting for their needs to be satisfied by some external source, human beings can work inwardly by means of their own thoughts and their will and their spirit to obtain nourishing, healing elements they need. And he uses the word spark and fragment. And that's the higher self. The Creator has placed within every creature a spark of himself. You must be like what you came from. I wrote this out 2 days ago, or 2 months ago. If there is intelligence behind life, and there is every reason to believe that there must be, then all of that intelligence is innate in each creation of that intelligence. Thus, universal mind, or the higher self, is complete and entire within each of us. We have only to discover it for its power and perfection for it to be ours. So, again, if there is intelligence behind life, and we all know that there is, then that intelligence that is behind life is innate in each creation of that intelligence. If you come from that intelligence must be in you. So God must be in you, or whatever you want to call that. The divine mind, God, Tao, spirit, consciousness, higher consciousness, Sam, Louise, Wayne, call it anything you want. The Tao that can be named is not the Tao. So that intelligence, now there's a spark of that intelligence in you. And that's usually where I stopped in my life until I wrote Wishes Fulfilled. But the third chapter of Wishes Fulfilled is called the highest self. And the highest self is when you begin to recognize that that spark can grow to become you. So that that spark, which is that little thing that made me say, let me dance with the fat girl. That little spark, it's just a spark, because then probably right after that I was off being an egoistic little boy, you know. But there was a spark in there. That spark that said, let Guy Cordy become one of us instead of us ostracizing him, you know. That little spark that said to Martha, come on, we'll have some fun here, you know. That's a spark. And then you go back to just being who you are. But that spark can expand and can grow. And the biggest lie that we've been handled, and what we haven't been raised on, I spoke a bit about yesterday, which is the recognition. Well, Neville puts it this way, who was a big influence in my writing of Wishes Fulfilled. This is the last chapter of The Power of Awareness. It's a book I gave to each one of my children. And they wrote back and said, Dad, it sounds great, but little steep, little heavy here. I said, well, then I have to unheavy it, if we will. Then I have to lighten it up. And in all of creation, this is the last chapter, in all of creation, in all of eternity, in all the realms of your infinite being, the most wonderful fact is that which is stressed in the first chapter of this book. You are God. You are the I am that I am. You are consciousness. You are the creator. This is the mystery. This is the great secret, known by the seers, the prophets, and the mystics throughout the ages. This is the truth that you can never know intellectually. This is the truth, that you are God. And we haven't been trained to believe that, and I don't know why. Why weren't we raised to believe that we are God? Jesus says it in John 10:34, as he's about to be stoned. Why would you stone me? You are a man, and you claim to be God. Is it not written in your laws that I have said, you are God? Those are right out of the words of Jesus. It's right in there. You could look it up. St. Paul in Philippians, have in you the same mind as Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God. Go to Psalms 82 in the Old Testament. You are all children of the Most High. Ye are all gods. It's all over the scriptures. It's in the Quran. It's in the Bhagavad Gita. It's in all of the holy books. God and you are one. You must be like what you came from. And if we had raised our children and to believe, instead we've created these organizations which take it over for us and say, if you want to know God, it'll cost you. Here are the rules, and this is how you fit in, and this is the way we'll do it. And we are the only ones who can give you access to God. We got a whole great big place over there in Rome called the Vatican that believes all of that, you know, that and we'll give you gold robes, and we'll give you. But remember what I said yesterday about what Rumi, the Byzantines and the Chinese, you know, it's like Jesus wouldn't be allowed in any of those churches today. Really. So, quick history. The highest self. It's the story of Moses. Moses was the prophet, great prophet, the one who, the Ten Commandments, and so here's the, in 1 minute, here's the story of Moses. It's 3,300 years ago. This is 1,300 years before the birth of Christ. This is 800 years, 8 centuries before Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching. This is the oldest spiritual text extant on the planet today, the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And in the Torah, in the book of Exodus, it tells the story of Moses, the Pharaoh, who is sort of imprisoning, if you will, the people, the Israelites, and he is making a declaration because he's threatened that a male child is going to become a prophet, and he doesn't want that to happen. So he orders, as pharaohs are allowed to do, every single male child that is born is to be killed right after their birth. And the soldiers will come and make sure, and that's what they do. They just killed every baby. But this one woman had this little baby, and she just couldn't stand the idea of having her son killed, so she wrapped him up in clothes and blankets or whatever and put him in a waterproof basket, I assume, and he was floating down the Nile. A woman comes across this little baby in the reeds in the Nile and sees this little baby, and she is just so taken by this little baby that she decides to raise him as her own. And she raises this little baby. Now the interesting thing about it is that the woman who finds this little baby is the daughter of the Pharaoh. So now the Pharaoh is the grandfather of the prophet that he was most terrified of, all right? And this is how legend tells us. Whether this is true or not, you'll have to decide for yourself. But it's a pretty good story. And so Moses is raised as the Pharaoh's grandson, and he's long about the age of 17 or 18. He gets into a big squabble with one of the soldiers, one of the sentries, and he kills him because he is persecuting one of the Israelites, and for some reason he's protecting, doesn't like the way they're treating these slaves. So Moses realizes that after he kills this soldier, that he's going to be killed himself. Even if he's the Pharaoh's son, that is a major crime. You don't do that. So he takes off and escapes. And he runs and escapes across the Sinai Peninsula. And there he meets a woman named Zipporah, and he marries her, and they have their children, and he's a shepherd, and this is 40 years go by. And he's out on the Sinai, and he's walking out there one day, and all of a sudden he comes across a bush. And this bush is burning, but it's not being consumed. It just keeps burning and burning and burning. And out of this burning bush, he hears a voice. And it's the voice of God. And God speaks to Moses. And this is what he says. I don't want to get this one wrong. So let me just read it to you real quickly. To Exodus. So the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, and God called out to him from the bush, and he says, Moses, Moses. And Moses says, Here I am. First words Moses speaks to God. Do not come closer, he says. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he continues and says, I am God. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and so on. And he gives him instructions. And he says, you are to go to the Pharaoh and you are to free your people. Moses says to God, wait a minute. Who am I that I should go to the Pharaoh and that I should bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Who am I to do this? And he answers, well, I will certainly be there with you. And this will be the sign to you that I have sent you. When you bring the people out of Egypt, you will all worship God at this mountain. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, the great English poet, wrote a little poem, a little four-line poem about that meeting. She said, earth's crammed with heaven, and every burning bush afire with God. And those who truly know take off their sandals, while the rest sit round it and pick blackberries. Just thought I'd throw that in. So Moses says to God, wait a minute. Didn't say that. But I think he did. He said, quote, if I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What should I tell them? And God replies to Moses, I am that I am. This is what you are to say to the people of Israel. I am has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is how I am to be remembered in every generation. I am that I am. Okay, so what's the name of God? I am. That. I am 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 that. I am. Okay? The reason I bring that up, oh my gosh, you've got it, it's right there too, it's right on your breast. I am. Every single time you use the name I am, you are using the name of God. So that when you say, in the book of Joel it says, let the weak man say, I am strong. Jesus speaks and says, before the God of your fathers was, I am, in the book of John. I am the way. God is the way. I am the resurrection. Nowhere does he say, I am the crucifixion. Even though most of Christianity focuses on that, on the suffering. But instead, Jesus said, I am the resurrection. When we went to Lourdes and we saw St. Bernadette, it's a wonderful experience there in Lourdes back in the 1850s. and she was speaking. She saw 18 apparitions, and it was the Blessed Mother. And the priest couldn't. The priest kept saying, "Ask her what's her name. Ask her what's her name." So finally, and the only time the apparition spoke and said her name, she said, "I am what? I am the Immaculate Conception." And the priest said, wait a minute, that's an event. She can't be an event. They forgot that Jesus said, "I am the resurrection." That's an event. Because God is the resurrection. God is the Immaculate Conception. That's what she said. And every time you use the name "I am," you are using the name of God. And the question is, how do you use the name of God? God didn't say when Moses said, "What is your name again?" He didn't say, "My name is, I hope things work out for you." He said, "My name is, I am that." So you have a name called I am. And you've got to be able to place into your imagination an I am as if it already were a present fact. He calls those things which do not yet exist as though they did. I am well. Never will you ever want to use the words, "I am depressed. I am sad. I am poor. I am helpless. I am incurable." Because you're using the name of God in vain. In the I Am discourses, Saint Germain says it this way. I am is the full activity of God. Having placed before you so often the truth of God in action, I wish you to understand its first expression in individualization. The first expression of every individual everywhere in the universe, that's you, either in spoken word, silent thought, or feeling, is I am, recognizing its own conquering divinity. The student, endeavoring to understand and apply these mighty yet simple laws, must stand guard more strictly over his thoughts and expressions, in word or otherwise. For every time you say, "I am not, I cannot, I have not," you are, whether knowingly or unknowingly, throttling that great I am presence within you. That's blasphemy. Why weren't you raised to believe that you are God? And that as God, you can manifest and attract and heal and create anything that you want. Healing is not done by somebody healing somebody else. Healing takes place when divine energy interjects with another divine energy, and there is no possibility of illness. This is I am. And these are the words you want to be really careful about. Because the last 5 chapters, which I don't have time to go into today, I may do a little bit tomorrow, but so many other things to cover, really deal with the foundations for a wish is fulfilled. We'll talk about it when we do the meditation. Being able to place into your imagination, I am, as if it already were a present fact. He calls those things which do not yet exist as though they did. It's right out of the scriptures. Now, I want to read one thing to you, and it's because we're coming up to, we'll be in Turkey the day after tomorrow, and then we'll be in Ephesus, and we'll be next door to Konya, where Rumi lived. Rumi wrote about Moses, and I got up this morning at 4:30, and I was awakened, and I thought, I'd like to read something from Rumi to them. What should it be? I just don't know. And it was 4:30 this morning, I got up, opened it up, and there it was. Would you like to hear it? Yeah. It's a good thing, because you're going to... Okay, bear with me. This is a little long, but not bad. A couple minutes. It's called Moses and the Shepherd by Rumi. Moses heard a shepherd on the road praying, "God, where are you? I want to help you to fix your shoes and comb your hair. I want to wash your clothes and pick the lice off. I want to bring you milk to kiss your little hands and feet when it's time for you to go to bed. I want to sweep your room and keep it neat. God, my sheep and goats are yours. All I can say, remembering you, is, ah." Moses could stand it no longer. "Who are you talking to?" "The one who made us and made the earth and made the sky. Don't talk about shoes and socks with God. And what's this with your little hands and feet? Such blasphemous familiarity. Sounds like you're chatting with your uncles. Only something that grows needs milk. Only someone with feet needs shoes, not God. Even if you meant God's human representatives, as when God said, 'I was sick and you did not visit me,' even then this tone would be foolish and irreverent. Use appropriate terms. Fatima is a fine name for a woman, but if you call a man Fatima, it's an insult. Body and birth language are right for us on this side of the river, but not for addressing the origin, not for Allah." Gets better. The shepherd repented and tore his clothes and sighed and wandered out into the desert. A sudden revelation came then to Moses. God's voice, "You have separated me from one of my own. Did you come as a prophet to unite or to sever? I have given each being a separate and unique way of seeing and knowing and saying that knowledge. What seems wrong to you is right for him. What is poison to one is honey to someone else. Purity and impurity, sloth and diligence in worship, these mean nothing to me. I am apart from all that. Ways of worshiping are not to be ranked as better or worse than one another. Hindus do Hindu things. The Dravidian Muslims in India do what they do. It's all praise, and it's all right. It's not me that's glorified in acts of worship. It's the worshipers. I don't hear the words they say. I look inside at the humility. Broken open lowliness is the reality, not the language. Forget phraseology. I want burning. Burning, be friends. Be friends with your burning. Burn up your thinking and your forms of expression. Moses, those who pay attention to ways of behaving and speaking are one sort. Lovers who burn are another. Don't impose a property tax on a burned out village. Don't scold the lover. The wrong way he talks is better than 100 right ways of others. Inside the Kaaba, it doesn't matter what directions you point your prayer rug. The ocean diver doesn't need snowshoes. The love religion has no code or doctrine, only God. So the ruby has nothing engraved on it. It doesn't need markings. God began speaking deeper mysteries to Moses, vision and words which cannot be recorded here, poured into him and through him. He left himself and came back. He went to eternity and came back here. Many times this happened. It's foolish of me to try and say this. If I did say it, it would uproot our human intelligence. It would shatter all writing pens. Moses ran after the shepherd. He followed the bewildered footprints in one place, moving straight like a castle across a chessboard, in another sideways like a bishop, now surging like a wave cresting, now sliding down like a fish, with always his feet making geometry symbols in the sand, recording his wandering state. Moses finally caught up with him. I was wrong. God has revealed to me that there are no rules for worship. Say whatever and however your loving tells you. Your sweet blasphemy is the truest devotion. Through you, a whole world is freed. Loosen your tongue and don't worry what comes out. It's all the light of the Spirit. The shepherd replied, Moses, Moses, I've gone beyond even that. You applied the whip, and my horse shied and jumped out of itself. The divine nature and my human nature came together. Bless your scolding hand and your arm. I can't say what has happened. What I am saying now is not my real condition. It can't be said. The shepherd grew quiet. When you look in a mirror, you see yourself, not the state of the mirror. The flute player puts breath into a flute. And who makes the music? Not the flute player. Whenever you speak praise or thanksgiving to God, it's always like this dear shepherd's simplicity. When you eventually see through the veils to how things really are, you will keep saying again and again and again and again, this is certainly not like we thought it was. Isn't that beautiful? Touches me so. There's a woman in the room who I'd like to have come up on the stage. Where are you, dear? This beautiful soul. Can you help her, Nance? Is she going to do it herself? Was on a cruise with me in the South Pacific early in this year in January. She was the victim of a very violent act. She was thrown over a cliff and left to die. And she's been in a wheelchair for 21 years. She went to see John of God, as I did, and after 21 years got control of her bowels for the first time after visiting with John of God, who took leukemia out of me like I had a hangnail. And now, the most amazing thing that's happening is this dear, sweet lady who's part of your group is going to walk to this stage. She couldn't do this in January. Dana. So Dana and I have been in communication, and she's been in communication with my daughter, and I just want you to just hold your breath and give her the strength to make it up. She's just determined yesterday that Nancy said, I'll help you go up to the stage, and she said, no, I want to show Wayne that I can walk. This is a miracle, what's happening in this moment. I thought she was going to take a few steps. She's walking the whole way. This is for you who think that all things aren't possible. She's got my hat on that she stole from me yesterday. They had all given up on this girl when she was a young girl, and she's still a young girl. You want to go that far? Yeah. Why don't you? This is Dana. Dana, take the mic. Now you tell this group of people what's been going on in you for the last few months and what brought you to this, my sweetheart.
Well, as you said, when I was 19, I was raped and thrown off a 75-foot cliff. I was stationed aboard the USS McKee. Actually, the first job that I had to do on board was tie up the USS Ranger.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
And 21 years later, after they told me I would never even breathe on my own, I'm now walking. Determination, belief, faith, stem cells. And John of God has brought me to this point, and at age 25, I read the book Manifest Your Destiny by Dr. Wayne Dyer, which kept me from suicide and helped me get through a divorce and keep pushing forward and believe. And for the very first 10 years, I was paralyzed from chest down. I had 0 hand function. Now, as you can see, and it's a continuous journey, as you all know, as life is. And I'm walking. So, and I'll continue until I'm completely out of the chair. And
Tell him what happened. Why did you go to John of God?
I went to John of God because you told me to.
Yes. And you do what you're told. Serena, are you listening?
I'm enlisted. I was enlisted. I know how to take orders.
Right.
So I went to John of God, and for 2 weeks, it was the most incredible time. Very peaceful. I had 2 spiritual surgeries. And after 21 years of having a paralyzed colon, I now have bowel control. It's the most amazing gift to get back. But just to have that gift is, it's precious. It's
And you even told me you had an orgasm. Now, was that from hearing my talk?
It was definitely that.
Thank you. Okay. And yesterday, I had my purple hat on, which was my favorite hat of all time. And she looked at it and she said, that hat would look better on me than on you. And the ego part of me for 1 minute said, that's my hat. And then it took over and I realized that giving it to her, giving her something that I prized was... And then she turned around and took off of her neck. Take this off. This triangle that was blessed by John of God, that's the symbol for the Nabajanya, the triangle. And she said, I'd like to give that to you. And it had been blessed by John of God. And I wore it all day till today. And now I realize it has nothing to do with the object. Remember what I said yesterday about the miser and his gold? It's the outpouring of love. And that's what you gave to me. And I'd like to give this now back to you as my outpouring of love back to you. I want you to wear this around
I'm not
your
giving
head.
you your hat back.
Yeah, I know. She's still a bitch. It doesn't make any difference. I have one of these blessed by John of God, and I want you to wear this.
Well, as you know, it says faith, love, and charity on it in Portuguese.
Yes. So thank you. You honor us by being here, and it's so good to see you. You look so beautiful. I love you so much.
Thank you. I love you.
Thank you. God bless you.